Hello, good evening, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to Monthly Current Affairs. The objective is to comprehensively cover polity related newspaper articles which appeared in various newspapers in August 2025 in one session. How many articles shall we discuss today? 14 in total, which appeared in various newspapers such as the Hindu, the Indian Express, the Hindustan Times, and various news websites. The purpose is to ensure that this is your replacement for a newspaper, but that doesn't mean you don't have to read the newspaper on your own. You have to supplement your own reading of the newspaper with these sessions. And at the end of the session, if you think that this content has benefited you, do not forget to press the like button, drop in your comments, share your feedback, and do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't yet. Let's get started and let's look at topic number one, sedition redux, which appeared in the Hindu newspaper. A similar topic, which was written, an article on this was written by the former judge of the Supreme Court, Justice Madan Lokur, on the same topic, sedition redux. If you look at section 124, capital A of the Indian Penal Code, it spoke of sedition. So Indian Penal Code was enacted in 1860. But sedition was not originally part of Indian Penal Code. It was added later, a decade later, in the year 1870. Why? Although some experts say that somehow this section was missed in the final draft of Indian Penal Code. Although the British, the Lord Macaulay, wanted this sedition provision in the Indian Penal Code, but somehow they got it messed up, missed it, and ultimately it did not appear in the Indian Penal Code when it was enacted in 1860. And then 10 years later, in 1870, Section 124, capital A, was added to Indian Penal Code, which spoke of sedition. What is the sedition? Whosoever by words, either spoken or otherwise, spoken or written, whether through visual representation, whether through cartoons or any other form, if you promote disaffection against the government established by law, which means the British government in India, you will be guilty of sedition, for which life imprisonment can also be given to you, or you may be sentenced to 3 years in jail and a fine as well, or only a fine. This was the sedition law. What was the primary objective of the sedition law? The objective was to curb the nationalist feelings. India was a colony, and maybe people were not even aware that they were ruled by an alien power, by a foreign power. This is not our own government, this is the alien government. We are a colony. There is an imperialist power governing us. So we had to educate the people that we are under alien power and we need to overthrow this alien government and we want to liberate ourselves. And how do you propagate this ideology amongst the masses? For that, you need newspapers. For that, you need nukkad sabhas. For that, you need theatre, you need plays. And the British realized that if we allow Indians to promote nationalist feeling, ultimately you are overthrowing the British government in this country. Then this colony would be liberated. That is why any form of free speech, any form of expression, whether through words or written or otherwise, if you promote disaffection against the government established by law, it is a criminal offense, sedition, and you will be arrested and prosecuted. This sedition law was multiple times misused against our national leaders, particularly Lokmanya Tilak. These details are very important so that we can understand section 152 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, because it is the BNS which has replaced Indian Penal Code. For example, against Tilak, look at the colonial period between 1876 till 1900. Close to 18 famines occurred in India, which led to the loss of close to 1 crore 90 lakh Indians. Particularly significant was the plague of 1897. And this is when the British passed a law called Epidemics Act of 1897. When plague occurred in Pune, the individuals, the officials who were responsible for controlling this plague, they were insensitive. For example, one Indian civil services officer, Walter Charles Rand, he was so arrogant that despite plague, taxes were collected from the people and our religious places were desecrated. To check whether people are suffering from plague or not, they were stripped naked, including women. And against this oppressive regime, people started protesting. And then Chapekar brothers, they assassinated this plague commissioner, Rand. And then Shivaji Maharaj's killing of Afzal Khan. You may have read about that poem. What Mr. Tilak did, he started two newspapers. One was Kesari, the other was Maratha. Kesari was in Marathi language, Maratha was in the English language. This is something important for your modern history as well. He started displaying newspaper articles. He published this poem which justified the killing of Afzal Khan by Shivaji Maharaj. This was considered to be seditious. Although the British press in Britain, they did not want any action to be taken against Lokmanya Tilak. But the Anglo-Indian press in India, they urged the government take action against Lokmanya Tilak because he is seditious. He is promoting disaffection against the government established by law. Ironically, the lawyer who secured bail for Lokmanya Tilak, 10 years later, he became a judge and he punished Lokmanya Tilak under another sedition case. But be that as it may, the point is there was plague in Pune. Repressive policies were implemented by the British government. One Indian civil services officer, Walter Charles Rand, who was responsible for controlling this epidemic in Pune, he was assassinated by the Chapekar brothers, and the Chapekar brother was hanged as well. And Lokmanya Tilak in the newspapers, look at the idea. Lokmanya Tilak in the newspapers somehow justified the killing of Walter Rand by indirectly publishing a poem which justified the killing of Afzal Khan by Shivaji Maharaj. This the British thought that you are promoting disaffection against the government established by law, and as such, you should be prosecuted for sedition. Justice Strachey, he was the judge, and he punished Lokmanya Tilak and sentenced him to 18 months imprisonment under sedition law. Lokmanya Tilak pleaded not guilty. I'm not guilty of sedition because I'm not promoting disaffection against the government established by law. But the Justice Strachey said, even if you're not promoting disaffection against the government established by law, but in your eyes, I see no affection either for the government established by law, which means sedition is not only promoting disaffection against the government established by law, but the absence of affection towards the government established by law. This is sedition. Lokmanya Tilak was prosecuted for sedition again. There came a time when Mahatma Gandhi was also booked for sedition. And this time he said, I am pleading guilty for sedition. Because it's the duty of an individual to promote disaffection against the government established by law if it is morally corrupt, if it does not take into account the sufferings, the grievances of the people. I am guilty of sedition. Prosecute me. And he was prosecuted, but then he was released early as well. But be that as it may, the question here is sedition law, section 124 capital A, was primarily used to target the nationalist leaders so that they do not develop the feelings of disaffection amongst the people towards the government established by law. Then came the Constituent Assembly. Constituent Assembly, which had to draft the constitution for the newly independent country, for all of us. And this constitution gave us the fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a), freedom of speech and expression. Originally, there were four reasonable restrictions on free speech under Article 19, Clause 2. With various constitutional amendments, for example, First Amendment, 16th Amendment, four more reasonable restrictions got added. So we have 8 reasonable restrictions in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, defamation, contempt of court, incitement to an offense, morality or decency. On these 8 restrictions, on these 8 grounds, reasonable restrictions can be imposed on your free speech. Now, the question was, what about Section 124 capital A? Because we have Article 13. Article 13, Clause 1 says all laws in force in this country prior to the commencement of the Constitution. If these laws are in agreement with fundamental rights, these laws will continue. If they are not, these laws shall be declared null and void. Sedition, although there was a demand by some members in the Constituent Assembly that sedition should be retained as a ground of reasonable restriction on free speech, but finally the Constituent Assembly decided no. The people should have the right to promote disaffection against the government established by law. Because this is not an alien government, this is not a colonial government, this is our own government elected by the people. And if this government is not taking into account the wishes, the aspirations, the grievances of the people, they should have the right to promote disaffection against this government. That is how this government can be voted out of power and new government can be brought in. So this is integral part of your free speech to promote disaffection against the government established by. But then came an important case, Kedarnath Singh, v. State of Bihar, 1962. A communist leader, he gave an inflammatory speech, and as such, he was charged under sedition. Matter went to the court whether sedition can be a ground, a constitutional ground, on the basis of which you can be arrested. Because it seems that this sedition law is incompatible with freedom of speech and expression. This judgment has been celebrated. But not many people realize that it is this judgment of the Supreme Court which brought sedition back into the forefront, but through a back door. How? Because previously sedition was not a ground on the basis of which your free speech should be restricted. But the Supreme Court upheld the validity of Section 124, capital A, saying this is constitutional, but with some restrictions. Restrictions in the sense, give whatever speech you want to give, no matter how inflammatory that speech is, no matter how provocative that speech is. Don't incite people to violence. If your speech leads to violence, then you will be booked for sedition. So sedition law was diluted. Previously, any expression, whether through words or whether written or through expressions, if you promote disaffection against the government established by law, you are guilty of sedition. You will be prosecuted. And in 1962, in Kedarnath Singh case, Supreme Court said sedition law is constitutional. But every speech, no matter how much inflammatory it is, no matter how provocative it is, unless and until it leads to violence, it won't be sedition. Later on in 1997, in Balwant Singh case, Supreme Court said the same thing. Because if you promote disaffection against the government in such a manner that you're asking people to raise arms and you want to overthrow the government elected at the center or in a state through undemocratic means, it should be sedition. Because if you're not satisfied with the government, contest elections and change the government. If you're not satisfied with the government, ask people to vote against that government through peaceful means. So there is a democratic way in which you can change this government. But if you're inciting people to violence to overthrow this government, then it is sedition. And that's how we can prevent activities such as terrorism, secessionism, Maoism, Naxalism in this country. Because they are advocating arms to overthrow the government. That's how they want to establish the people's rule. That is sedition. Because you are leading to violence, you're promoting violence, you're inciting people to violence. Long story short, on sedition, there was a restriction that unless and until your speech leads to violence, then it is sedition. Otherwise, it is not. In fact, when Shrimati Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards, there were riots, anti-Sikh pogrom in Delhi. Slogans were raised in favor of the Khalistan, Raj Karega Khalsa, Khalistan Zindabad. They wanted to create a separate political entity called Khalistan. They wanted to liberate Punjab and get a new state, new country formed called Khalistan. Slogans were raised, and these slogans, the Supreme Court said, these are not seditious. No matter how much provocative your statements are, your speeches are, unless and until it leads to violence, it is not sedition. And this was reiterated by the Supreme Court in another landmark case, Shreya Singhal versus Union of India 2015, where Supreme Court said advocate whatever you want to advocate, propagate whatever you want to propagate, but don't incite people to violence. But then we saw the sedition law was misused, overused, hyperused, abused by the political. How? I'll give you a few instances. A journalist, Vinod Dua, goes live on his YouTube channel. Lockdown had just been imposed because of COVID 19. And he said there is a danger that when millions of people are walking barefoot back to their villages from the towns and cities, there is no food for them. There is no vehicular traffic for them. There is no provision for transport for them. There may be riots for food. What was he asking? He was asking government to intervene in this situation so that people, the migrants who are coming back to their villages from the cities and towns, they should be provided shelter, they should be provided food, they should be provided transport facilities. A case of sedition was filed against him. Why? Because you're promoting disaffection against the government established by law. Similarly, a filmmaker in Lakshadweep, she criticized the administration for weakening the quarantine norms in Lakshadweep. And then she alleged that since these quarantine norms have been tweaked, the center is launching a bio war on the people of Lakshadweep. A case of sedition was filed against it. A member of the parliament belonging to YSR Congress, he criticized his own government's handling of the COVID situation in an interview which he gave to a television channel. What happened? Sedition case was filed against this MP. Why? You are promoting disaffection against the government established by law. And what about the news channels which broadcast, which aired this interview? Same treatment, booked under sedition. So any genuine criticism of the government was also viewed as sedition. Although the conviction rate was less, but sometimes the process becomes the punishment. If you are booked, you spend many years in jail, ultimately you are declared free, not guilty by the courts, but the process becomes a punishment. And finally, in 2022, the Supreme Court said we will revisit sedition because of its potential for abuse. We will revisit the constitutionality of sedition law. Until that time, all the cases of sedition which you have filed will be paused, and no further arrests can be made under the sedition law. Sedition law 124 capital A, part of the Indian Penal Code, primary objective was to curb the nationalist feelings for freedom. This law in the independent India was misused, overused, hyperused, abused by the political class. Finally, in 2022, Supreme Court is saying we will revisit sedition to see whether it is constitutional or not. Till then, pause all the cases of sedition in this country, and no further arrests can be made under Section 124 capital A of Indian Penal Code. Until the time the Supreme Court could have decided whether it is constitutional or not, the Indian Parliament replaced Indian Penal Code with Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita (BNS), and now there is no sedition law under BNS. Instead, what we have, Section 152 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Now look at the wording of this section. Whosoever, purposely or knowingly, by words, either spoken or otherwise, spoken or written, if you promote disaffection, this time not against the government established by law, but this time against the nation. If you do activities which are subversive activities, maybe you want to secede a part of your country from the Union of India, you want to launch an armed struggle, and you want to liberate a state in India from the Union of India, all these secessionist activities will be punishable under Section 152 of the BNS, which means previously it was Rajdroh, offense against the Raj, against the government. This Rajdroh was replaced by Deshdroh. Now you can't commit offense against the nation. So the idea was that sedition law is gone. We don't have a sedition law now because you can't be prosecuted for promoting disaffection against the government established by law. But you can be prosecuted if you excite feelings of separatism, if you want to promote armed struggle, if you want to secede from the Union of India. If you want to carry out subversive activities against the nation, against the unity, sovereignty, integrity of the nation, you will be prosecuted under Section 152 of the BNS. And now this section has been used against journalists. For example, two journalists of the Wire.in, Karan Thapar and the founding editor of the Wire.in, Siddharth Vardarajan. When Operation Sindoor was launched by the government of India in the aftermath of the dastardly Pahalgam attack perpetrated by the terrorists from across the border, killing citizens, tourists in Pahalgam, specifically on the grounds of religion, identifying people whether they were non Muslims and killed them. In response to that, Operation Sindoor was launched, but then some videos were uploaded on their YouTube channel by the Wire.in, wherein they invited journalists from Pakistan as well, experts from Pakistan as well. One individual, one citizen, approached the Guwahati police to register FIR against these journalists under Section 152 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita. Why? Because through words, whether spoken or otherwise, you are exciting the feelings of separatism. You are going against the sovereignty and integrity of India, and as such, you are guilty of Section 152. Similarly, a case was filed against another journalist, Mr. Abhisar Sharma, under the same provision. Why? Because he called the government communal. He called the government insensitive. He called the government illegitimate. So, this is where the parallels were drawn. People thought that this is the same section, but in a different clothing, but this is sedition, and that is why they say sedition redux. This section 152, some say, is not a different section anymore. It is the same sedition, but in a different clothing. So if sedition law was misused, section 152 will also be misused. Matter went to the court. Currently, a petition is pending before the Supreme Court which challenges the constitutional validity of section 152 of the BNS. But here is an important question. Can a law be challenged on the grounds that it is liable to be misused? If there is a law for which there is a potential that it can be misused, can this potential for misuse be the grounds for declaring the law unconstitutional? The answer is no. An ordinary law can be challenged in the court on two grounds. If it violates fundamental rights, and if it is beyond the legislative competence of the body which has enacted that law. You cannot challenge an ordinary law on the grounds that it has a potential for abuse or misuse. That's one thing that you have to keep in mind. But then what Supreme Court also has done, it has invoked a very important doctrine called overbreadth doctrine. Overbreadth doctrine. What is that doctrine? Listen to me carefully. For example, I am a teacher. Can you criticize me on the grounds that I'm teaching irrelevant concepts? Yes. Should you not criticize me if I'm teaching only for prelims and not for mains? Should you not criticize me if I am teaching only superficially and not going into the depth of the topics? Yes. Should you not criticize me if I'm canceling the classes? Yes. Should you not criticize me if I leave the classes early? Should you not criticize me if I'm starting the class late? Yes, on these grounds, you can criticize me. But can you criticize me on the grounds of how I look, the choice of food that I consume, regarding my personal life? No, you can't. Because there are some things which you can do, there are some things which you can't do. What if I pass a law or Unacademy passes a law that you cannot do anything which goes against the dignity of a teacher? Look at this phrase. A student cannot do anything which violates the dignity of the teacher. What was my purpose? My purpose was to prevent that you should not criticize me for my sexual orientation. You should not criticize me for my personal life. You should not criticize me for my sartorial sense, the way I dress, the way I look, the way I talk, whether I lisp or I speak properly. Maybe because of my disability. So you should not do this. But look at the phrase used. You should not do anything which goes against the dignity of a teacher. Unacademy may say, if you are criticizing the teacher because he is teaching only for prelims and mains, you are violating the dignity of the teacher. If you're criticizing the teacher because he left the class early, you're violating his dignity. If you're criticizing the teacher that he is teaching superficial concepts, you're violating the dignity of the teacher, which means this phrase which has been used has overbreadth. In a sense, it prohibits something which you should not do, these things. But in the process, it prohibits those things should be given to you as a matter of right. So the wording of a law should not be so sweeping that it prohibits more constitutionally protected activity than necessary to achieve a legitimate government interest. My legitimate interest is to prevent you from making remarks against my personal life. But in the process, I am prosecuting you for saying something which is your right as a constitutional right. And if any provision of a law has this overbreadth on this ground, it can be declared unconstitutional. Freedom of press is not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution. In Ramesh Thapar v. State of Madras 1951, Supreme Court said, so what? Freedom of press is not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution. Free press is an integral part of our fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution. Free press is a fundamental right. Circulate your newspaper is a fundamental right. Distributing the newspaper is a fundamental right. But then under this Article 19(1)(a), there are reasonable restrictions. For example, under Article 19, Clause 2, reasonable restriction on your free speech is, which means on a journalist also is, that you can't go against the sovereignty and integrity of the nation. Should you allow it? Justice Madan Lokur says, this expression which is used, sovereignty and integrity of India, they have a definite meaning. Definite meaning in the sense, you can't break up this country. That means through violence. If you're advocating violence to break up this country, this is not protected as part of your free speech. We will prosecute you. In normal course, expression of views, however radical they may be, cannot be construed to be endangering the sovereignty and integrity of India. Are the foundations of our republic so weak that few slogans can endanger it? Are the foundations of our republic so weak that few slogans, no matter how provocative they are, they will shake the foundations of this secular republic? That's what Madan B. Lokur writes, and he says that this section 152 of the BNS, which the government says is not sedition, but it has the same impact of the sedition law which existed prior to BNS, which means it has the same potential for abuse, overuse, misuse, and hyperuse. If you look at the kind of questions asked in the mains examination these years, sometimes you have to be more specific as well. Specific in the sense, these two journalists, Karan Thapar and Siddharth Vardarajan, they asked for the FIR copy. If an FIR has been filed against us under section 152 of the BNS, share the FIR copy with us so that we can get in touch with our lawyer and get our defense. Seek our defense, challenge this FIR, but this FIR copy was not shared with them. And this violates the law of the land because the Supreme Court in Youth Bar Association in 2016 said it is the right for an accused that they be given the copy of an FIR. And if this copy of the FIR is not shared with the accused, this is violation of the law, this is violation of the Supreme Court. Then you have to keep in mind whether from this particular topic, what sort of questions can be asked. You need to understand sedition law and compare it with the section 152 of the BNS. You need to remember this judgment because sharing the FIR copy with the accused is a right of an accused. And you have to draw similarities between the sedition 124 capital A and section 152 of the BNS. The topic is over. Clear? Great. Now let's look at another topic, making a case for transparency. You would know that since 1993, since this second judge's case, India is the country where judges are appointed by themselves through a system called collegium system. There has been a lot of criticism of this collegium system. Criticism on the grounds that it is unconstitutional. Nowhere in the text of the Constitution is it mentioned that the president shall appoint judges of the Supreme Court and High Court based on the recommendations of the collegium. Such a system does not exist in the original Constitution. On top of that, it is criticized on the grounds that this system is opaque. How are these judges appointed, selected, recommended? We don't know. What does this collegium test in a candidate? Constitutional philosophy, the talent, the merit, or whether your family members were part of the Supreme Court and High Court? There is an allegation of nepotism, charges of nepotism against the judges as well, against the judiciary as well. But something significant happened. Justice Yashwant Verma, the then judge of the Delhi High Court, from his official residence, half-burnt cash was recovered. Investigation took place. A three-member in-house committee was appointed by the then Chief Justice of India, Justice Sanjeev Khanna, which recommended yes, which came to the conclusion yes, that this judge is corrupt, and as such, action should be taken against this judge. Newspaper reports say that Justice Sanjeev Khanna asked this judge to resign. He did not. Then he recommended to the government that please remove this judge. And that is how a motion calling for the removal of Justice Yashwant Verma is now currently pending in the parliament. And maybe he will become the first ever judge in the history of independent India to be removed by the president based on the resolution passed by both houses of the Indian parliament by special majority. But then when Justice Sanjeev Khanna was the Chief Justice of India, three important decisions were taken for the sake of transparency. Because transparency is the key. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. If the allegation against the collegium is that you lack transparency, you're opaque in your functioning, open your doors to the criticism. Open your doors about how you function. Let the sunlight come in. Let's be transparent. And three important decisions were taken when Justice Sanjeev Khanna was the Chief Justice of India. First, the Supreme Court decided that all the judges of the Supreme Court, we will put out on our website, the website of the Supreme Court, the assets that we hold, the amount of assets that we hold. This will tell the public that we are transparent. Ours is an open door. Reflect on it. We have nothing to hide. And all the High Court judges, they will also upload their assets on their individual websites, on the websites of the concerned High Court. This was meant to be countering the perception amongst the people that judges are also corrupt. They amass wealth which is disproportionate to their known sources of income. So it was a welcome decision because previously Supreme Court had refused to tell the public, to reveal to the public the amount of assets that individual judges hold. Now the Supreme Court said, don't worry, we will reveal it. Step towards transparency. Second important decision taken when Justice Sanjeev Khanna was the Chief Justice. The Supreme Court Collegium said, what is the role of the High Court Collegium? Because there is the High Court Chief Justice and two senior judges of a High Court. They also recommend names to the Supreme Court Collegium about an appointment in their own High Court. What is the role of that collegium? What is the role of the Supreme Court Collegium? What do we see in a candidate? How do we arrive at a decision? How do we recommend this name to the president? He will reveal it to the public. So a largely opaque system. A curtain was pulled from this opaque system. Transparency was ensured. We will tell the public, we will put it on our website, what led to this person, to this candidate being recommended to the Supreme Court, recommended to the president for appointment. And we will also see, we will share details about the gender and caste composition of these judicial appointments. Because we want this judiciary to be a plural institution, a representative institution. There should be caste rep, although there is no reservation in higher judiciary. But we will display it on our websites. We will look into the gender and caste composition of our judicial appointees. Finally, third important decision. We will make public the details of the candidates recommended for the post of a judge and whether their family members are or have been the judges of the High Court or Supreme Court. Because the allegation against the collegium system was that you breed nepotism. Three remarkable decisions. Promoting transparency when Justice Sanjeev Khanna was the Chief Justice of India, and we thought that finally this institution has come alive. Finally, this institution will reflect the aspirations of the people, will open its doors, will let the sunlight pass in, will be transparent, and opacity will be gone. But immediately, when Justice Sanjeev Khanna retired, we have Justice Gawai as the Chief Justice of India. And the collegium system recommended the nephew of Justice Gawai to the Bombay High Court. Something you may not have read in the newspapers because not many newspapers covered it. Number one. Number two, most importantly, Justice Vipul Pancholi. He was the judge of Gujarat High Court. But then something happened. What happened? In 2023 July, some people from Gujarat approached the then Chief Justice of India, Justice Chandrachud, and begged him that please transfer Justice Pancholi. We don't need him here. Why? I don't know. Do you know? No. Why? Because it's opaque. We don't know what happened. And then in an unprecedented manner, the then Chief Justice of India, Justice Chandrachud, consulted the judges of the Gujarat High Court, consulted the judges of the Supreme Court, whose parent High Court was Gujarat, because they are aware of the functioning of the Gujarat High Court. And finally, he comes to the conclusion that we are going to transfer Justice Pancholi from Gujarat High Court to Patna High Court. You know what happened? For 9 months, this transfer was not approved by the government. Because after all, the final order of transfer has to be issued by the President of India, which means by the government of the day, which means maybe the government did not want Justice Pancholi to be shifted from Gujarat to Patna High Court. Only after 9 months, he was shifted to transferred to Patna High Court. Under what circumstances, we don't know. And now he was the Chief Justice of Patna High Court. And now he is to be recommended to the Supreme Court. Who will take this decision? Collegium, consisting of Chief Justice of India and 4 senior judges of the Supreme Court. One such judge who is part of the collegium is Justice Nagaratna. Justice Nagaratna dissented. Justice Nagaratna said, no, he should not be promoted. Why? Because we don't know what happened in July 2023. Why the lawyers and the judges in the Gujarat High Court wanted this judge to be transferred? What had he done? We don't know. So we have to go into it. Because this is not an ordinary appointment. If everything goes fine, Justice Pancholi in 2031 will become the Chief Justice of India. So for someone to be appointed as the Chief Justice of India, the bar has to be set high. This person should not be recommended. I disagree. I dissent. Yet he was recommended for appointment. This time, do you know what happened? In just 2 days, the government formalized the appointment, issued the order, and Justice Pancholi is now the judge of the Supreme. So what, sir? This happens. Yes, it does. But what about the second important decision taken by the predecessor of the current Chief Justice of India, Justice Sanjeev Khanna, that we will explain on our website what led to us recommending a candidate to the Supreme Court? What happened to that transparency which you sought to introduce in the collegium system just a few months ago? All that is now appearing to be. And we don't know on what grounds is Justice Nagaratna dissenting. And on what grounds is Justice Pancholi recommended to the Supreme? And this is where there's a mains based question for practice for you. Transparency in judicial appointments and asset disclosures is vital in preserving the credibility and integrity of the higher judiciary government. This is your practice. If you're an iconic student, send your answers to us and we will evaluate. Let's look at topic number 3, the measure of justice. The grandson of the former Prime Minister of India, H.D. Devegowda, the nephew of a former Chief Minister of Karnataka and the current Union Minister, Kumaraswamy, the son of the former minister in the Karnataka government, Mr. Revan. The name is Prajwal Revan, 34-year-old, former MP. He's accused of multiple crimes. On one such crime, finally, we have a verdict. And what is the crime? He was accused and ultimately found guilty of raping his maid multiple times and then recording her and then blackmailing her with the videos. And finally, Prajwal Revana has been convicted and he has been sentenced to life imprisonment. Life imprisonment without any possibility of an early release, which means imprisonment for the normal life of an individual, which means he will die in the jail unless and until the higher courts acquit him or reduce his sentence, which we hope the courts will not. From this particular judgment, from this particular event, there are three important takeaways which you have to keep in mind for your examination. Takeaway number 1, we say the arc of the moral universe is long, but finally it bends towards justice. What this judgment signifies is that no matter how much powerful you are, there will come a time where the law will catch you, where you will be prosecuted. It sends a strong message that no matter how much powerful you are, no matter how much influential you are, law will ultimately. And imagine the plight of this woman who was raped by Prajwal Rebana. We can't even imagine what she must have gone through. Extreme pressure on her to back out, to withdraw her complaint. And she withstood all those challenges and ultimately stood firm on her allegations and proved it in the court of law. That's a strong message. Strong message number 2. We say in India, we get a date, but we don't get justice in the judiciary. Immortalized by Sunny Deol, Tariq pe Tariq pe Tariq. The beautiful thing about this case was that it took slightly more than a year for the trial to complete and ultimately judgment to be delivered. Quick justice, swift justice. Justice should not be delayed, because if justice is delayed, it is no justice at all. But this is where we need to thank Supreme Court. Why? Because in 2017, Supreme Court said there are thousands of cases pending against the legislators, whether current legislators or ex-legislators. We need special courts to try these politicians, to try these legislators and punish them. And it is because this case went to a special court which tries MPs, MLAs, legislators, whether former or current. That is why this justice was delivered swiftly in about a year. And normally, what happens is there are frequent adjournments which happen in a case. Witnesses turn hostile, case files are lost, victims, they are threatened, witnesses are eliminated. But that we did not see in this particular case. That's the best takeaway number 2. And takeaway number 3, if you delay the verdict, if you delay the case, a prolonged delay of a particular case goes against those victims who are especially from the weaker, marginalized, underprivileged sections of the society. Because if justice is delayed, there is no incentive for me as a victim to approach the police, to approach the court, because I know it's going to take a lot of time for justice to be delivered. These are three important takeaways from this verdict strictly for your examination. And this is where you need to practice another question. Time bound probe and completion of trial is essential to build trust in the rule of law. Justify in 250 words. That's your practice for mains examination. Clear? Are you able to follow what we are discussing? Very good. Dangerous curb on free speech. Something happened on India got latent. A stand up comedy show of comedian Samir Rana, wherein he used to invite various guests, and one such guest was Ranveer Alabadia, podcaster, and he made a speech or he gave a comment. That comment was in bad taste. That comment was preposterous. That comment was horrible. Nevertheless, case was filed. Why? Because it was alleged that your content is obscene. Whether it is obscene or not, we will have to wait for the court to decide, but something else happened. Ranveer Alabadia approached the Supreme Court. Their Supreme Court, there are multiple cases filed against me in different police stations in this country. It may not be possible for me to travel from one court to another court in different parts of the country. I have a simple request, simple plea. Can you club all these FIRs so that I can defend myself in this particular case in only one jurisdiction, maybe the Bombay High Court? Supreme Court initially refused. And Supreme Court made a comment that you should be ashamed of what you have done. Our daughters and sons will be ashamed of hearing and watching your content. If you look at this dispassionately, this is not for the court to say. Court is meant to view a particular matter dispassionately and focus on what is the plea. The plea is club all the FIRs together. I will defend myself in one jurisdiction. Either give it or don't give it. Don't patronize. Don't use this patronizing language that you should be ashamed of yourself. That is not the job of the courts. But be that as it may, then he was told to surrender his passport. Very good. Maybe you are at a flight risk. You may run away from this country like Vijay Mallya, Mehul Choksky, Nirav Modi. Okay. But then he was also told that you stop all your podcasts on YouTube without understanding what is going to be the impact on those people who depend on Ranveer Alabadia for livelihood. What about right to livelihood, which the same Supreme Court has said is a fundamental right? But be that as it may, this case is pending before the court. And when it was heard again, another petition was filed. An intervention application was filed by a non governmental organization called Cure SMA Foundation. What this foundation said that this comedian Samir Rana is making jokes on disabled, particularly a individual who was blind and an individual who was suffering with spinal muscular atrophy, which is a rare and very severe genetic disorder. He was mocked at by Samir Rana. Action should be taken against them, and we should prevent such hate speech. Now, what is this hate speech? That becomes important for your exam because once in the past, in the mains examination, this question was asked in the mains examination in GS paper 2. There are two important verdicts. In 2014, interstate migrants, they approached the Supreme Court. My lord, please issue a directive issue a directive so that these politicians, these religious leaders, or those who are holding power, ministers, they should not issue hate speeches against the migrants. The Supreme Court clarified what is this hate speech. Supreme Court said hate speech is an effort wherein you want to marginalize individuals based on their group membership. So you belong to a particular group, whether it is a minority, religious minority, or a caste group, or a linguistic group, or a group of disabled individuals, differently abled individuals. If you are marginalizing this individual because he belongs to a particular group, and you are advocating that these members should be ostracized from the society, these members should be segregated from the society, and you are promoting violence or genocide against these individuals because they belong to a particular group, this is hate speech. And hate speech is not protected under freedom of speech. Because you have Article 19(1)(a), which talks about free speech, but that does not mean you can promote hate against a particular group and you want to ostracize them, segregate them, promote violence or genocide against that group because this particular individual belongs to a group. This was reiterated by the Supreme Court in Amish Devgan v. Union of India 2021. Amish Devgan is quote unquote journalist. He was organizing a program on his television channel wherein in a fit of rage he leveled allegations against a Sufi saint Khwaja Muhyiddin Chasti of Ajmer, called him terrorist, called him a thief. Some say he also called him a rapist. Then Amish Devgan received threats on his Facebook, on his WhatsApp, so on and so forth. He approached the court and he asked the court protection that I am issued threats because I said something on my show for which I apologized later. Supreme Court said, no, we will not give you protection. Why? Because your speech, if you're a journalist, yes, you can give a political speech, you can organize a program, you can criticize the government, you can criticize the policy of the government. But if your criticism is used to defame a particular group, stigmatize them, or insult them, and through that you're promoting violence against that group, or if not violence, at least psychological hatred towards that group, and this is hate speech, this is not protected speech under Article 19(1)(a). And this SMA Cure Foundation, it argued before the Supreme Court, their Supreme Court, you have to decide whether the content on this show was obscene. We want you to issue another guideline that please direct people that you cannot use hate speech against those who are suffering because they are also members of a group and you want to ostracize them. You want to promote hatred or psychological hatred towards them, or you're mocking them. This should not be protected under your free speech. Supreme Court, for which Supreme Court received a lot of criticism. Supreme Court said there are two kinds of speeches. One is a commercial speech, the other is a non-commercial speech. Now, what is a non-commercial speech? For example, the speech given by a politician. The speech written in the newspaper, for example, columns written in the newspaper. For example, press organizing debates on electronic media, or for that matter, expressions, cartoons. These are non commercial parts of speech. And then there's a commercial speech, for example, advertisement. That's also free speech. You're promoting your product, that's also free speech. But if you are using a commercial speech, for that, more restrictions should be imposed. And your commercial speech should not hurt the sentiments of certain sections. Notice this phrase, hurt the sentiments of the people, of certain sections of the society. Because the Supreme Court said, if you are mocking those who are specially abled, differently abled, it could set a precedent. Now you will mock other vulnerable sections of the society. Tomorrow you will mock children. Then you will mock senior citizens. Then you will mock ethnic groups. Where will you stop? We have to draw a line. If your speech is commercial speech, you're getting benefited from this. You cannot hurt the sentiments of certain sections. Question can be asked in your mains examination to differentiate between commercial and non-commercial speech. Look at the definition on your screen. A commercial speech is an expression that primarily proposes or furthers a commercial transaction or is tied to the economic interests of the speaker. For example, advertisements, promotional claims. You are comparing two different products. You are saying this product is good, this is my product, buy it. This is a commercial speech. Although it's a speech, but you are benefiting from this. It's a commercial speech. Monetarily benefiting from this. It's a commercial speech. Then we have a non-commercial speech. For example, academicians giving a speech, teaching, politicians, artists, journalists, all these expressions, they have a purpose, which is public purpose. You want to educate people through these political rallies. You want to educate people through these YouTube sessions where we are preparing you for the civil services exam. This is under non-commercial speech because this is the information that we give so as to help you train for an exam. Although we sell our products as well. For example, if you buy our course now, the price is this. You can buy our current affairs program, so on and so forth. That may also come under commercial speech later. But the point is, the Supreme Court differentiated between commercial speech and the free speech and the non commercial speech. But this is where it becomes interesting. Look at the kind of questions asked in your mains examination. Now, UPSC wants you to dig deeper into the topics and may ask you a question which is further down the concepts. What about disability rights and free speech? There's a lot of awareness in our society now, and we want to become as inclusive a society as possible. For example, although today also we make jokes on women, misogynist jokes, but at least the number has come down because at least there is the sense that you can't shame a woman. You can't have misogynist comments or statements being made. Previously, people were oblivious. They were not even concerned. They were not even aware that we can't make jokes on a woman. For example, Amir Khan in one of his movie, there's a song, "Khambe jaisi khadi hai, bijli hai, ladki hai ya chadi hai." He later on apologized for this because at that time there was not this sensitivity that you can't be making songs like this. But today maybe you won't hear such songs. Societies evolve over a period of time. Now there is a lot of awareness that you should not fat shame somebody, or you should not be making misogynist comments, or you should not be making communal remarks, or you should not be making casteist statements. Although it still happens, but at least there is an awareness. But what about people with disability? In Jeevan Naya in 1936, Ashok Kumar was one of the actors in this movie, pre-independent movie. Blindness was viewed as a form of moral punishment. So if there is a blind, the movie conveys that it is the divine punishment on that individual. That if you commit some mistakes, you will turn into blind. Films like Tom, Dick, and Harry in 2006, Pyare Mohan 2006. Now you are using disability into a comedic device. Langda, Andha hai kya? So on and so forth. So now disability becomes the source of comic timings in the movies. Where will this awareness come from? When will this awareness reach? And do we have some Supreme Court interventions on disability rights and free speech? That may be asked in your examination. We need to understand that dignity and equality form the core of our constitution. What Article 14 talks about? Equality before law, equal treatment in equal circumstances, equal protection of the law. Then we have a beautiful law passed by the Parliament in 2016, Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. It imposes a duty on the state, on the governments, mandates the governments that those who are suffering from some disability, they should be treated with equality. They should live the life of dignity at par with others. That is why the governments ensure that if there is a public transport, there is a ramp. So instead of a stair, there is a ramp which can be used by those who are suffering from disability. Right now, there is a viral clip going on Instagram where a lady is telling a man that I cannot date you because you are on the wheelchair. Insensitive remarks. Is it covered under free speech? And what has Supreme Court said on this matter? In Nipun Malhotra v Sony Pictures 2024, Supreme Court issued guidelines to all the media houses that whenever you portray a person with disability, you have to ensure that person is treated with respect. You can't mock that individual because that individual also has the dignity and equality, which is the core of the Constitution. In Samir Raina case, the court said humor is well taken because it was alleged that he made mocking, disparaging remarks against someone suffering from blindness, suffering from a rare genetic disorder. Humor is well taken, but when we start laughing at others and create a breach of sensibility on a communal plane, community plane, it becomes problematic. So now the courts are also sensitive to these disability rights. And now is the time for these disability rights and sensibilities to transfer in the minds of the common public. But now, one more interesting thing. We have freedom of speech and expression. Just understand it this way. We have freedom of speech and expression under Article 19, Clause 1, Clause A of the Constitution. Is it an absolute freedom of speech, an absolute fundamental right? It's not. Which means it comes under reasonable restrictions. 100%. Which are these reasonable restrictions? 8 reasonable restrictions. Something that I listed down at the start of this program. But is dignity a ground to restrict free speech? Maybe you can mock somebody suffering from disability. Maybe. I'm not saying, I'm not encouraging you to do it, but I'm just looking at the constitutional provision. Your free speech can be restricted on the grounds of violating sovereignty, integrity of India, security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, defamation, contempt of court, incitement to an offense, morality or decency. But can it be restricted on the grounds of dignity of an individual? No. But once we remove freedom of speech and expression, we look at the rest of the Constitution. Everybody deserves equality, dignity, and this dignity is enshrined in the preamble of the Constitution. And we use preamble to interpret the provisions of the Constitution if the language of this Constitution or the laws is ambiguous. So if there is ambiguity, whether you can mock the people with disability or not, this ambiguity will be put to rest when we look at the preamble, which talks about dignity of an individual. And preamble starts with we, the people of India, which includes everyone, which includes people with disability. That's what you have to keep in mind. And that is the end of topic number 4. Any questions as of now? All clear? Are you able to understand or is it going too much? Okay. Now, should HIV/AIDS testing be made mandatory before marriage? Meghalaya has now decided, although there are talks, that we will make HIV/AIDS screening mandatory for people before marriage. Something of the sort was decided by Goa as well previously, although it has not been implemented. Mandatory HIV/AIDS screening is not allowed in India, neither in Meghalaya nor in Goa, but there are talks. What is HIV and what is AIDS? HIV is an infection. But if this infection is untreated and its extreme form will manifest in a disease known as AIDS. Sir, how is this topic relevant for our exams? GS paper 2 specifically. Look at this mains based question asked in 2024 mains. Right to privacy is intrinsic to life and personal liberty and is inherently protected under Article 21 of the Constitution. Explain. In this reference, discuss the law relating to DNA testing of child in the womb to establish its paternity. If we can rephrase it, and maybe this question will be asked, right to privacy is intrinsic to life and personal liberty under Article 21. Explain. In this reference, discuss the proposal to make HIV AIDS screening mandatory before marriage. This is the question that can be asked in your exam. Now, let's understand this particular article. HIV and AIDS Prevention and Control Act of 2017. It is this law which talks about testing. So you can be tested for HIV AIDS, but you can't be forced under this law. This testing has to precede with counseling. First, you have to be counseled that we need you to be tested to see whether you are HIV positive or whether it has been untreated and it has developed into AIDS. We need to test you. So counseling takes place. If after this counseling you agree, that means we have your consent, the patient's consent is necessary, then we can test you. But whatever report is generated, for that report, there is confidentiality. You cannot reveal the content of this report with anyone. This is confidential. That's what is mentioned under this law. So if you make HIV AIDS screening mandatory, it would violate this law of 2017 because this law says counseling before testing, consent of the patient before testing, and confidentiality. So if you force somebody to do this testing and then share this report with your prospective spouse, you are violating the confidentiality clause. You are violating this law, and as such, it is illegal. And if you are tested positive, then you will be linked to an appropriate antiretroviral treatment centers where treatment will be given to you. But listen to me carefully. Can these HIV positive patients marry? The law talks about it. It's not that the law is silent on this, the law talks about this. How? For example, COVID 19, coronavirus, which originated in 2019. If you were positive or negative for COVID, for that you would be tested. RT PCR. And if you notice, if you have suffered, if you have been infected with COVID, once you take a look at your report, it also talks about the viral load. If the viral load is high, there is enough chance of you transmitting, communicating this COVID virus to others. But if the virus load is less, it is not transmittable. That is why we would always check what is the, okay, you have been tested positive for COVID, but tell me what is the viral load. Similarly, when you are tested for HIV and you come out as positive, but then we give you treatment, antiretroviral treatment, over a period of time, this viral load comes down and it reaches a point that when you are tested again for HIV, the test comes out negative. At that stage, you can marry. And at that stage, this viral load, which is less, cannot be transmitted. That means this person who is HIV positive, but the viral load is so less that you can't transmit to your spouse, to your sexual partner. Hence, marriage is allowed, marriage is legal. So there is no bar on HIV infected patients from getting married. But there is a counter argument. Confidentiality, some say my foot. In a sense, you go to a hospital. Let's say you have to extract your tooth, or let's say you have to do some treatment. For that, blood tests are taken. Without your approval, without your consent, you will see a blood report which will test you for HIV. Then where is the confidential? That means the hospitals, the paramedical staff, they violate this law. Without your consent, without counseling, you are tested for HIV/AIDS, and nobody tells you that we need your consent before we can test you for HIV positive. But the argument says in India, if we can check the horoscopes, the kundali of each other, why can't we test and check whether you are suffering from HIV or not? Because the spouse needs to know. And sometimes there are people with HIV positive status. They get married because there is a societal pressure, there is a family pressure. They hide their HIV positive status. And if the viral load is high, they transmit this HIV to their spouse as well. And then it gets transmitted to their children as well. Ultimately, it's a health scar. And this is where there is the legitimate interest of the state. Isn't it the legitimate interest of the state to protect the health of its citizens? And whenever there is a legitimate aim of the state can infringe upon your privacy. So if tomorrow a law is passed, which makes it mandatory for patients, for individuals, that before marriage you have to be tested for HIV positive, maybe this law is not unconstitutional because right to privacy is a fundamental right, but it is not absolute. The state can infringe upon your right to privacy if the state has a legitimate aim, and that legitimate aim can be protecting the health of the citizens. In Meghalaya, where there is a talk to make HIV/AIDS screening mandatory before marriage, some experts say that the Christian community in Meghalaya, they say it, not me, so these are not my words, don't hold me accountable for these statements. They say that Christian community, and who is saying this? This article written in the Hindu newspaper. Particularly if you look at Janabi Goswami, she is working in the field of AIDS in Assam and in different parts of the country. She says that in Meghalaya, there are people who belong to the Christian community. They still think that it's a taboo to use condom, even if it is recommended by law, because the law, the 2017 law, it promotes safe sex practices. But there are some who belong to orthodox religious ideas. They don't consider it fit to use the contraceptives. And as such, implementing this law in Meghalaya is a challenge. And since you are not promoting safe sex, what if there are HIV positive patients with high viral load? You are going to transmit it to your spouse as well, to your partners as well. And that is why we need to make it mandatory. What we also need to know, how to reduce stigma which is attached to HIV and AIDS. If a person dies because of cancer, you don't hide it. You openly say that this person died because of cancer. This person died because of the heart attack. This person died because of hypertension. This person died because of AIDS. No. This is where you draw the red line because there is a stigma attached. And do you know why? Because the first case in India where AIDS was detected in a sex worker. And then people assumed that AIDS is affecting only those who have multiple sex partners or who go to prostitutes, which is not entirely true. There are people who resort to drugs through injections and then they share this syringe with other drug addicts. That can cause AIDS. So it has nothing to do with going to the prostitute or in red light areas and having multiple sex partners. Not entirely. To your mother, you can transmit HIV/AIDS to your child as well. So there are multiple ways in which you can be HIV positive, and if untreated, it can lead to AIDS as well, the highest degree as well. So we need to reduce the stigma. And that is why awareness campaigns used to be launched. And this is where it becomes important for your GS paper for ethics, integrity, and aptitude. As a civil servant, what will you do? If you are posted in an area where people are not resorting to safe sex contraceptives, safe sex measures, what will you do? There used to be campaigns that this particular disease does not transmit by touching. So you don't have to be so insensitive that you will shy away from the people who are suffering from HIV or AIDS, because this is the disease which does not transmit by touch or by showing compassion. Similarly, now we need another campaign, which is U is equal to U, something that is working very well in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu. U is equal to U means undetectable is untransmittable. If you are HIV positive, but then you are taking medicines on a regular basis, you are taking treatment, antiretroviral treatment, your viral load will come down. And there will come a point where your viral load is undetected. At that time, it is untransmittable. So U is equal to U, undetected or undetectable is untransmittable. This really works. So we need to focus on this so as to reduce the stigma attached with HIV/AIDS in our society. Such scientific messages can remove stigma from the community so that as many people as possible will test and be linked to treatment. So, treatment is necessary. AIDS is incurable, but it is not necessary that every HIV positive case will transform into AIDS if you are getting treatment. And so as to prevent people from taking the extreme form of AIDS, we need testing, we need mass testing. And that mass testing is happening in Maharashtra. Mass testing is happening in Tamil Nadu. Mass testing is happening in Karnataka. But for that, we need to encourage people and tell them, even if you're HIV positive, you will be sent to treatment centers where there will come a point, maybe in 3 months, where you are administered these medicines. Your viral load will come down and then it is non transmittable. That will work. But there is another argument related to politics. It says that a right to privacy, for example, which is a fundamental right under Article 21, declared by a 9 judge bench of the Supreme Court in K.S. Puttaswamy v. Union of India. Supreme Court said right to privacy is a fundamental right. But this right to privacy can be infringed upon, can be can be violated, if we can use this term. But for that, we have to see whether the state has a legitimate aim in infringing upon your privacy. And the state has to find the least restrictive way of infringing upon your privacy. The example that I often quote, for example, we have a mosquito. This may be Aedes aegypti, dengue causing mosquito, and we need to kill this mosquito. How do we kill it? Maybe we will use that electric bat and swat on this mosquito and kill it. Or we can use morphine all out if they work. Or we can use, let's say, spray. Or we can use AK-47 assault rifles to kill all of them. Or we can use an IED, improvised explosive device. Or we can use an atom bomb, a nuclear weapon. But then, if you use a nuclear weapon, the entire race will be eliminated, not just mosquitoes. So it will have an impact beyond mosquitoes. If we use AK-47, you are going to destroy this building as well, just for killing that mosquito. So we have to find the least restrictive way to kill this mosquito. Similarly, if you have to infringe upon privacy, find out the least restrictive way of infringing upon this privacy. And these constitutional experts say that if you make HIV/AIDS testing mandatory, it is not the least restrictive way of tackling this problem. You have to find some other alternatives, because this would violate privacy, which is the fundamental. Because without consent, you can't do that because it's an invasive procedure. That is another newspaper article. Let's look at another article, another column, another important news development. Bills to oust arrested CM trigger House chaos. And we are talking about 130th Constitutional Amendment Bill. What is this 130th Constitutional Amendment Bill introduced by the Honorable Home Minister in Lok Sabha, and now it is pending with in the Parliament? A joint parliamentary committee will examine this bill. What is the purpose of this bill? The bill tries to amend. The proposal is to amend various provisions of Indian Constitution such as Article 75, 164, 239 AA related to Union Council of Ministers, State Council of Ministers, and Council of Ministers in Union Territories. What is the purpose? The purpose is if there is a minister, for example, I am a minister, and I'm accused of a crime, accused. Golden rule of criminal justice system is you are innocent until proven otherwise. So you are innocent until proven guilty. I am accused of a crime. And for this crime, if I am proven guilty, minimum punishment would be 5 years. That means I am accused of a crime for which, if I am convicted by the courts, minimum 5 years punishment will be awarded to me. And now, where am I? I am in the lockup. I am in the lawful custody of the police. I am in the judicial custody. I am arrested. If you are arrested for a crime for which, if you are convicted, you will be sentenced to 5 years or more in jail, then on the 31st day of your arrest, Prime Minister should advise the President, remove this individual. Chief Minister should advise the Governor, remove this minister. But if this advice does not come on the 31st day of my arrest, then on the next day, which means the 32nd day, I will seize. This is the crux of this 130th Constitutional Amendment, that a minister, including the Prime Minister, including the Chief Minister, whether minister at the Union or state or Union territories, Prime Minister, Chief Minister, if for 30 days you are in jail for a crime for which, if you are convicted, you will be sentenced to 5 years or more in jail, then on the 31st day, Prime Minister should advise the President, remove you. But if the Prime Minister does not advise, the next day you shall cease to be the minister. That's the 130th Constitutional Amendment Bill. Why do we need it? Association for Democratic Reform, which is working in the field of electoral reforms, it says 46% of the MPs elected in the 18th Lok Sabha, the current Lok Sabha, they have criminal charges against them. That's not it. 31%, they have serious criminal charges against them. Rape, murder, offenses against women, so on and so forth. What was this percentage in the 17th Lok, 2019 till 2024? This percentage was 43%. So from 43, it has shot up to 46. Serious concerns about criminalization of politics. Lord Acton once said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. George Bernard Shaw, on the other hand, he says, power doesn't corrupt men, but fools, however, if they get into the position of power, they corrupt power. We need serious interventions to tackle criminalization of, so that these criminals cannot continue as lawmakers, because these are lawbreakers. Lawbreakers should not continue as lawmakers. There is something called Nash equilibrium. What is it? If there is a game, if you're participating in a game and there are multiple players participating, if only you change the rules of the game, change the mechanism of the game, approach of the game, it won't matter unless and until others also change the rules of the game, change their strategy. But what are you trying to say? I'm saying if it was only one political party fielding candidates with criminal past, public opinion would have been against this political party. That means only you are changing the rules of the game. But now, if every political party will give candidates with criminal past tickets, then everybody is winning. Everybody is benefiting from the system, from this change in strategy. That is Nash equilibrium. If only one political party would have fielded candidates with criminal past, that political party would have been ostracized by the maybe. But if every political party is setting up candidates with criminal past, we can't point out fingers only at one political party. Because whether it is national or state political party, big or small political party, everybody is sailing in the same boat. And irony is, ADR, Association for Democratic Reform, it came up with a probability. Who is more likely to win an election? And then the comparison was between the candidate with clean past and the candidate with criminal past. ADR said if you look at the data, candidate with a criminal past is more likely to win the election as compared to a candidate with a clean past. Who is to be blamed? Maybe you and me. BJP. 39% of the candidates who won the election on the BJP ticket have serious criminal charges against. Congress, 49%. Trinamool Congress, 45%. Shiv Sena, 71%. As they say in Hindi or Urdu, is hamam mein sab nang. Everybody is sailing in the same boat, and that is why we need an intervention to cleanse our politics of criminals. And this bill is a welcome step. Let's take the examples. V. Senthil Balaji, a minister under Mr. Stalin in Tamil Nadu. He was accused of cash for job scam. Took allegation is he took cash so as to give people jobs. He was arrested, stayed in jail for 11 months, 14 months. But then he was still a minister and at the same time in the jail. Now, how can you sign files? How can you perform your duty when you are in jail? You can't. Can we take official files to the jail and get them signed? No. It means under no circumstance can you work. Can you perform your duties? After a lot of persuasion, he resigned. He was still in jail, but then he applied for bail. Supreme Court granted him bail. Supreme Court said there is less likelihood that the trial would be completed very soon. Till that time, we cannot keep you under arrest. You are released on bail. And few days later, he is appointed as a minister. Now, Supreme Court is furious. You need to understand that this 130th constitutional amendment bill has drawn its power or inspiration from the Supreme Court. Supreme Court asked this minister, choose between your post or your freedom. Because if you are accused of cash for job scam and now you are reinstated as a minister, you will threaten the witnesses, you will tamper with the evidence, you will violate the rule of law. To choose between freedom or the post. Chose the freedom, resigned as the minister. Arvind Kejriwal, chief minister, yet he was in jail. Whether rightly arrested or wrongly arrested, that's a separate matter. But he was in jail. And when he was in jail, how could you sign the files? Which means you can't work. Now, let's assume for a moment that you were wrongly incarcerated, you were wrongly arrested. But you were in jail, you can't perform the duties of the chief minister or a minister. Ideally, you should resign. You know what is more scary? That we need such a bill in the first place. It should have been obvious that the moment you are in jail, you should resign as a minister. I'm not telling you that you should resign as a legislator. No, because you're innocent until proven otherwise. But as member of the executive, as someone who has to sign on files, you can't perform your duties once you are in jail. It should have been obvious, natural that you resign from your job. And the irony is, we need a law enforced, but this law is needed. But then there is another side. There is criticism of this bill. There are concerns. Concerns are this bill relies upon an executive act which is completely uncertain and arbitrary, namely arrest, to change the will of the people with respect to an elected minister, CM, or even PM. All the central government can do, get a chief minister of an opposition ruled state arrested, keep him in jail for more than 30 days, and he has to be removed as the chief minister. So the law has the potential for misuse, abuse, overuse. Better would have been if the law mentions that you are charge sheeted, then you should be sacked as a minister. Second, role of judiciary. There is no role of judiciary here. You are arrested by the police. What if, for example, you are arrested under a law which may be preventive detention, for which maybe later on we will enhance the punishment to more than 5 years? You are kept under preventive detention, you are gone as the chief minister or a minister. So the central government can dismiss an elected chief minister of an opposition ruled state or a minister of an opposition ruled state, and you are gone, which means it has some federal issues. Now, on paper, this amendment seems balanced or non discriminatory. The government may say, the central government will say, why are you so worried about this? We have even kept prime minister under the ambit of this law. We have even kept the union ministers under the ambit of this law. Why are you worried? So, on paper, the provisions look non discriminatory, balanced, but they are actually biased, one sided in their concept as well as design. Can you imagine ED or CBI or NIA, which are central authorities, arresting the prime minister or arresting a union minister? But can you imagine NIA, CBI, ED arresting a chief minister of an opposition ruled state? Yes. Chief minister of a ruling political party at the center? No. So it has enough potential for abuse. Plus, the period 30 days sounds arbitrary. Normally, the police is given 90 days to investigate and file a charge sheet in a court of law. Why are you saying 30 days? The very fact that this period is 30 days is so small a time, so short a time, that it is manifestly arbitrary. And any law, if it is manifestly arbitrary, would violate Article 14 of the Constitution, which is right against arbitrariness. Let's look at the data. Union Minister for Finance is answering a question on the floor of the Lok Sabha. What is the question? Between 2015 and 2025 June, in this decade, the ED Enforcement Directorate, which works under the Finance Ministry, it would have filed a lot of cases under Prevention of the Money Laundering Act, PMLA. How many cases were filed and how many convictions did you get? The minister concerned is replying on the floor of the parliament and says, we have taken up close to 6,000 cases, 5,892 cases to be precise, during this 10-year period. But only 15 people have been convicted in 8 orders, which means conviction rate is so poor. Which means you may assume that this law is being weaponized by the ruling party at the center to target its opponents, and process becomes a punishment. And the same thing would happen when a chief minister of an opposition ruled state or a minister of an opposition ruled state is arrested under PMLA. Although later you will be convicted, but for that period, you can't be the minister or the chief minister. You're violating the will of the public. This is how you will have to look at issues from the civil services perspective. First, give arguments in favor, then give arguments against. You never know what sort of question is asked in the. So look at the advantages, look at the disadvantages, look at the reasons, look at the objectives, and also look at and discuss potential concerns. That's the end of this topic. Clear? Great. Now let's look at another topic, punishing process. Nalsa v. Union of India. Have you heard of this case? Delivered by the Supreme Court in 2014. And what happened because of this case? Supreme Court recognized transgender as the third gender. So this binary, men, women, male, female, boy and a girl, this binary was junked. Supreme Court upheld and looked at the diversity and recognized that transgender is a third gender. Supreme Court further said that these transgenders have been discriminated against throughout their history. And because of that, the members of the transgender community, they are socially and educationally backward. And when you are socially and educationally backward, that means you are eligible for affirmative action policy. Which means Supreme Court directed the center that you provide these transgender person reservation in government jobs and educational institutions. And in response to the Supreme Court judgment, the year was 2019 when a law was passed by the Parliament known as the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019. The most important aspect of this judgment was self identification. If we have men, women, and now transgender as a third gender, there are three genders. Gender is a societal construct. If I want to change my gender from male to female, does that mean I have to go for sex replacement surgery? And then I can change my gender from male to female? No. Supreme Court said it's about self identification, which is intrinsic part of your identity. You identify yourself as male, you are male. You identify yourself as female, you are female. You identify yourself as a transgender, you are a transgender. Self identification. You don't have to necessarily go for reductive surgeries to change your gender. No. Although the law says, which is violating the spirit of the Supreme Court judgment, it says you need a certificate by the district collector if you need to change your gender. And we will test you, check whether your gender should be changed or not. But be that as it may, that's not the crux of this article. The crux of this article is there is a doctor from Manipur, Beyonce Leshram, initially a male, but then underwent sex change surgery, embraced the gender of female. And now she wants to travel abroad for further studies. But what do her educational certificates show as a gender? Male. Now she is running from pillar to post to get the gender on her educational certificates changed into female. But there she is facing bureaucratic. She goes to the university. University says, no, we are not the ones who issued you the certificate first. So you have to go to the first entity, which is maybe a school, State Board of School Education. First, if they correct it, then you come to us, we will correct it. But since we are not the first ones to issue you the certificate, you have to get it changed by the previous entity. Basically, bureaucratic hurdle. And finally, she approached the Manipur High Court, and Manipur High Court directed that change her gender ASAP because she has to travel abroad. And right to travel abroad is a fundamental right under Article 21. And the Nalsa judgment recognizes transgender as a third gender, and that too self identification is an important part of your identity. What does this judgment tell us? There is institutional reluctance, there are bureaucratic hurdles. In any case, the society was not so sympathetic and with empathy towards transgenders. We discriminated against them. Now that the law is in their favor, the judgment is in their favor, even then the society seems reluctant to embrace them. But this is a shining example where she stood up to the system, fought this legally, and through this wrote a glorious chapter for the transgender community. And maybe this struggle may set a precedent to other transgenders that you can fight legally, and maybe send a signal to the political class, to the officials, that you can't act as an impediment and roadblock into the constitutional rights of the trans. Just keep this episode in mind whenever there is a question related to transgenders or the stigma that is faced by them or the institutional hurdles being faced by them. This story of Beyonce Leishram is something very, very important for your exam. Clear? Let's look at another topic: religion versus dissent. Which right wins? What does that mean? You have a fundamental right to assemble peacefully without arms at a public place. You have the right to protest. But this right to assemble peacefully without arms is not an absolute fundamental right. It can be restricted. On what grounds? On the grounds of public order, on the grounds of morality, on the grounds of sovereignty and integrity of the nation. Similarly, you have a fundamental right to freedom of conscience and freedom to freely profess, practice, and propagate your religion, which comes under Article 25. But the difference is, look at this carefully. Constitution gives us a fundamental right and then imposes exceptions or reasonable restrictions normally. Because first you are given freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a), and then Article 19(2) imposes reasonable restriction. You have right to life, but then there is an exception, procedure established by. You have right against discrimination, but then there are exceptions, women, children, and educationally backward class of society, so on and so forth. But religious rights are such that first there is an exception, there is a restriction, and then there is a fundamental right. How? Because Article 25 says, first, subject to public order, subject to morality, subject to health, and subject to other provisions of this part, you have freedom of conscience and freedom to profess, practice, and propagate your religion. Which means the most inferior fundamental right of all the fundamental rights is Article 25. Because it can be subjected to not only public order or morality or health of the society, it can also be subjected to other fundamental, particularly right to equality, particularly right to life and dignity under Article 21. But be that as it may, if you have these two rights, which right wins? Right to protest or right to practice your religion? Right to protest in the sense, Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan 2018. Supreme Court said if you have a fundamental right to express yourself, you can express through protests. And you have the fundamental right to assemble peacefully without arms. Can you block an important road? And through that, you can cause inconvenience to the commuters. Because if you cause inconvenience to commuters, you are violating their other right, which is the right to travel freely throughout the territory of India. You are violating their another right, Article 19, Clause 1, Clause G, which is the right of every citizen to practice any occupation, any trade, any business. What if on this road I have a shop, I have a business establishment, and if you're blocking this road, I can't have customers coming. to my shop. So you're violating my right to livelihood. The Supreme Court said in this case, we have to balance. You protest, you assemble without causing inconvenience to others, which means you can't block a road for an indefinite period. We have to ensure that you're exercising your protest, but we have to balance it so that it does not affect the traffic. It does not affect the public tranquility, public peace. 2019, a law was passed, Citizenship Amendment Act. Against this law, there were series of protests in different parts of the country, in Mumbai, but most significantly in Delhi at Shaheen Bagh, where now the protesters are protesting against this law, which is their fundamental right. They're assembling at a public place peacefully, which is also their fundamental right, but they're blocking a road for an indefinite period of time. Matter went to the court. Although by that time the protests had come to an end. Why? Because COVID-19 lockdown was imposed. But then during COVID, Supreme Court gave the verdict. Supreme Court said, how do we balance the two? Your right to protest and right of others to also travel freely, right of others to carry out their trade activities. How do we balance the two? Supreme Court said the government should have a designated place where the protest will take place so that you are protesting as well and it doesn't cause inconvenience to the commuters. It doesn't affect the traffic, it doesn't block the important road. That's how we will balance the two. Although there were some people who criticized this judgment, saying, my lord, you are compartmentalizing dissent. What does that mean? A new iPhone 17 has been launched. Now you are asking your parents, I need 17 Pro Max, orange color. Parents refuse. What do you do? If you will keep on begging your parents, maybe they won't listen. Now you will take an extreme form. What is that extreme form? You will start on a hunger strike. I won't eat anything. Your mother, full of compassion, empathy, her heart will bleed by seeing you not eating. Ultimately, they will give in and say, okay, 17 Pro Max, 1 TB, this phone will be given to you. Finally, you win. Now, whether your claim is legitimate or illegitimate, I'm not getting into that. But I'm saying you're causing inconvenience to your parents and they give in to your demands. Now, the point is, if there are protesters protesting against a government policy, against a particular law, you need to inconvenience the government so that the government can listen to your demands. And how do you inconvenience the government? By blocking a road. So that if others are facing inconvenience, they will also urge the government, please listen to them, talk to them, find out a solution because you're causing inconvenience to all of us. The government will then bow down to your pressure, at least talk to you. But if you are allowed to protest at a designated place where you are not causing inconvenience to everybody, what will be the value of your dissent? The government will not listen to you. That's the criticism of this judgment. But the point is, Shaheen Bagh judgment, and then during the farmer protest, Supreme Court said you can't be blocking roads for an indefinite period of time. Now, this article in the Hindustan Times says for protest, democratic protest, rules seem to be something different. But for religious processions, rules are slightly different. For example, Kamar Yatra, which originally started off as a very small affair, but over a period of time, it has gained momentum, it has gained scale as well. Now it's a large scale yatra. And now there are these yatris who are causing inconvenience to the public, not only by traveling barefoot on important roads and causing inconvenience to public, but also because of their boom boxes. blazing music, causing inconvenience, which affects right to Article 19(1)(a), which talks about right against pollution, noise pollution as well, right to silence as well. This article says the only time there was a restriction on Kanwar Yatra was during COVID 19. Otherwise, there seems to be no restriction on the Kanwar Yatra. While as for democratic protest, there seems to be restrictions that you can't block an important road for an indefinite period of time and cause inconvenience to the people and cause inconvenience to the traffic. These judgments are important for you to understand because fundamental rights are not absolute, even your freedom of religion. Because you have the right to swing your wrist, but your right to swing your wrist ends where my nose begins. You can't be violating the rights of others as well. This is the restriction that you. That is another article related to your freedom of expression or freedom to assemble peacefully, and then freedom to profess, practice, and propagate your religion. Here is the practice question for your mains. Religious processions and civic dissent both occupy public spaces. Yet courts have repeatedly emphasized reasonable restrictions and the need to balance competing fundamental rights. Critically examine how the Supreme Court's jurisprudence structures this balance between Articles 19(1)(a) and B and public order and commuter rights. Write an answer to this in 150 words and submit it. Now, before we continue further, I want to see if you have understood these topics, then we will proceed further. If you have any questions, please let me know. No questions? Okay. I have a beautiful article written by Milan Vaishnav in the Hindustan Times. Hits and misses in one nation, one election idea. 2017, when Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister, advocated for one nation, one election. Then it was supported by Election Commission of India. And then a committee was set up, a high level committee headed by former President of India, Shri Ramnath Kovind. This Ramnath Kovind committee was asked, listen to me carefully. This committee was not asked, tell us whether we should implement one nation, one election or not. We will implement one nation, one election, that we have made up our mind. Now we are only asking you, suggest and recommend what changes are required, whether in our constitution, whether in our laws, whether in our rules, what changes are required so that we can implement this idea. Suggest those changes. And this committee submitted its report and said we should have one nation, one election. That means one election for both Lok Sabha as well as state legislative assemblies. And if you know that since the first election, we have always had simultaneous election. That means elections to Lok Sabha and the elections to the legislative assemblies were conducted simultaneously. But then in the late 1960s, this simultaneous elections phase cycle broke. Why? Because the state governments were dismissed under Article 356, President's rule was imposed. In 1970s, Lok Sabha was also prematurely dissolved by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. And that is how the cycle of simultaneous elections broke. And now we have periodic elections, regular elections. It is as if we are in a continuous cycle of elections. There was 2024 Lok Sabha election, then elections in Punjab, in Maharashtra, and in Jharkhand. Then we saw elections in other states. Then we saw elections in Delhi. Now we will see elections in Bihar. Then we will see elections in 5 states. It is as if we are in a continuous cycle of elections. And that is why a biggest electoral reform is suggested, recommended, known as one nation, one election. This article says that those who advocate in favor of one nation, one election, they propose this idea on three grounds. There are three main arguments. Argument number one is, if simultaneous elections are conducted in this country, we will save time, we will save money, we will save bureaucratic resources as well. Political leaders and government machinery, they will be freed from perpetual campaigning. And the political class, the ministers, the prime minister, they will spend more time on governance rather than on campaigning. Voters, for example, migrant voters, they don't have to repeatedly travel back to their state to exercise the right to vote. They can come once, vote for Lok Sabha as well as legislative assembly election, and then go back to the city where they work. And it will also reduce the campaign costs. That is why we need one nation, one election, because of these advantages. Second, if we have simultaneous elections, voter fatigue will be reduced. It is as if we are asking people to vote multiple times in a single day. Even if elections are held periodically, non simultaneously, still will have to vote 2 times in 5 years. Will that cause voter fatigue? Or will voter fatigue be caused if you have to stay in queue to get the latest iPhone 17 Pro Max? But be that as it may, the proponents, they advocate, they argue that if simultaneous election is conducted, it would mean less voter fatigue and greater voter turnout. And third is, as soon as election dates are announced, model code of conduct comes into the picture. And when model code of conduct comes into the picture, no new policies can be launched, no new schemes can be launched. It is as if the governance is on a standstill. To prevent this from happening, let's have elections simultaneously once, model code of conduct during that period. After that, for the remaining 4.5 years, the government can focus on governance. Milan Vaishnav writes that there are problems with all these so-called advantages. And the problem is, we are saying one size fits all. Milan Vaishnav writes that these arguments, all these arguments, three arguments, they have merit. But each merit is weaker and more complicated than advertise. We are advertising them as some sort of biggest reforms or advantages, but in reality, it was complicated. And these merits are weaker. Number one, on time savings. We say if elections are conducted simultaneously, the government, the ministers, the prime minister at the center, they will focus on governance. Otherwise, normally what they do, they focus on elections. So prime minister would be busy in Bihar, just like the prime minister and ministers were busy in Jharkhand and Maharashtra. They were busy in Uttarakhand. Now they will be busy in Bengal. It is as if we need to save the time of these ministers and the prime minister so that they can focus on elections once, and for the remaining 4.5 years, they can focus on governance. Milan Vaishnav, and this is something which was previously advocated by constitutional expert Gautam Bhatia as well, who wrote in the Hindustan Times a couple of years ago, something which has been advocated by Milan Vaishnav now. He says it is more about political choice rather than structural necessity. Who is asking the prime minister to campaign in the states? Who is asking the ministers at the union level to campaign in the states? It is the political choice that they have. Why don't you decentralize elections and let the state cadre of your political party run and campaign the elections in that state? Why do you need to convert even a local body election into a national referendum? Who told you? So if we have multiple elections, periodic elections, and you are saying that is problem because ministers and prime minister, they are unable to focus on governance because they are in a continuous election cycle mode, who asked them to do this election campaigning? Decentralize elections so that the state party units of the BJP, the Congress, the other political parties, they can campaign in their state. Why do you have to make every election a national election and a referendum for the national leadership? That's problem number. Problem number two, you are saying we will save money, but our election expenses are most and remarkably efficient. In terms of the GDP, the 2014 general election cost the central government 0.03% of the GDP. Not a big cost. But, sir, we have also heard that these elections we have spent 34,000 crores. That's what ADR says. 36,000 crores. That's what ADR says. No, that money is the money which political parties spend on their own. And we are not concerned with that. Although we should be, but we are not concerned with that. Let them spend as much money as they want. That's not government money. That's not our money. That's not taxpayers' money. That's the money which Ambani, Adani, and other corporates donate to political parties. We have never heard Ambani advocating that we should have one nation, one election, so that I can donate money to a political party only once in 5 years. After that, I can focus on one tara. So our election expenses are efficient, costing 0.03% of the GDP, which is efficient. But if you are talking about campaign spending by political parties, for that we need another reform. Reform is imposed limits on the spending by political parties. Because as of now, there is a limit to the amount of money that a candidate can spend in an election. For example, I have to contest election to a Lok Sabha, a bigger Lok Sabha constituency. I have a limit. I can't spend more than 90 lakhs. But is there a limit on a political party? No. So if these 36,000 crores which have been spent in elections by different political parties, let's have a limit on the amount of money that you can spend as a political. Now you may ask why? Why do we need to impose a limit? Because if there is no limit, it violates level playing field, which means a political party with massive money at its disposal, it will have an undue advantage over another political party which lacks money, which violates level playing field, which violates free and fair elections. And the Supreme Court has said this free and fair election is part of the basic structure of Indian Constitution. So those who advocate in favor of simultaneous elections, they say we will save a lot of time, we will save a lot of resources if we implement one nation, one election. Milan Vaishnav argues that maybe this is not a good idea. And maybe the benefits which you are advertising, they are not benefits, they are weaker ideas. Because we have been spending less money on elections, less money of public money, taxpayers' money. And at the same time, if you want to save the time of the politicians at the central level, at the central government, we need a different kind of reform. Let the national leadership of a political party focus on national politics and let the state level political party leadership focus on the state elections and the local body elections. You don't need to convert every state election into a national election. But, sir, what about government officials? What government officials? Sir, we need paramilitary troops to manage these elections, to provide security to these elections. We need election officials. Teachers have to be taken out from school so that they can organize elections. They can be the polling officers, they can be the presiding officers of these polling stations. We need observers as well. We need massive government machinery in these elections. And if it happens repeatedly, then it's a cause for concern. Why not have one election simultaneously and be done with this? So that for the next 4.5 years, the teachers, the paramilitary troops, they can focus on their job. Milan Vaishnav says even this argument is weak. Why? Because since 1990s, our central paramilitary forces, they have doubled in size. So it's not like there's a humongous burden on them. No, they've doubled them in size. And in fact, if we hold simultaneous elections, that means we are holding elections simultaneously in the entire country, it leads to unimaginable concerns. It has its own risks because then you will thin out the security. Right now, we are focusing on particular state and we are providing security. If we have to focus on the entire country at the same time, it is going to thin out our resources. But, sir, at least the voter fatigue will be reduced if voting is conducted simultaneously. Milan Vaishnav says, look at the statistics. In case of voter fatigue, evidence from India is mixed. Mixed in the sense, state election turnout. I told you there was a time when elections used to be conducted simultaneously. Then the cycle broke when state elections are conducted separately, Lok Sabha elections separately. And after this cycle broke, we saw state election turnout is higher than national election. And you will be surprised to know that sometimes when the state election and Lok Sabha election is conducted in proximate, that means one after the other, we see that election turnout is higher in state elections, which suggests that people and voters, they don't develop fatigue. They still come out in large numbers and vote. So there is no evidence to suggest that because we are organizing elections multiple times, there is voter fatigue, which leads to low voter turnout. Because in reality, the empirical reality is different. Voter turnout increases if we conduct elections more times. And something else. If model code of conduct is implemented, it leads to policy paralysis. That's the argument. Milan Vaishnav says no, because you implement model code of conduct only in that state where the election takes place, not in the entire country. So, and in fact, if model code of conduct is implemented, what happens to the ongoing programs, policies, and schemes? They work the way they are. It's only that there can't be a new policy or a scheme implemented because then it amounts to bribing the voters. So, how is this frequent imposition of model code of conduct affecting governance? I don't understand. And Mela Vaishnav argues that ironically, simultaneous elections could also result in more and not fewer elections. Why? If the government loses vote of no confidence and a fresh election is called, listen to me carefully. For example, we have Bihar election right now, and we had Lok Sabha elections in 2024. Now imagine we have simultaneous election. That means in Lok Sabha, next election will be in 2029. In all the 28 states, next election would be held in 2029 simultaneously. But imagine if Bihar throws up a hung assembly, no political party is in a position on the government. And then we have a coalition government. And coalition governments sometimes are unstable, which means maybe in Bihar in 2027, the government falls. Do you know what will happen? Currently, there will be then next election, fresh election in 2027. And then the term of that legislative assembly will be till 2032. That means full 5 years. But if one nation, one election is implemented and the government falls in 2027, then the election has to be conducted again. But this time, not till 2032, but till 2029, which means only for the remainder of the term for 2 years. Because you have to identify with the general elections. Your cycle will be same of the entire country. So what will happen? There will be election in 2024 in Bihar, then there will be election in 2027 in Bihar, then there will be election in 2029 Bihar. So ideally, when two elections would have taken place, we will have three instead. Simultaneous elections may or could result in more elections rather than few. So if you really wanted to implement this reform because you wanted to reduce the number of elections, you might end up turning the opposite way. More elections under simultaneous elections than currently. Then, sir, what is the reform? The reform is maybe one nation, two elections. State polls would be clustered at the midpoint of parliament's term. So if we have 2024 Lok Sabha election, let's say in the middle of 2026, we will have state elections in all the states. Reducing the frequency while retaining separate elections for state as well as national elections. Because if elections are conducted simultaneously, then local issues will be kept on the back burner. National issues will dominate. So people will be asked to vote in the name of national security, in the name of India, Pakistan, in the name of Article 370, which a voter in Odisha would have no concern with, maybe. His concern is I'm not getting the benefit of old age pension. I'm not getting the Aadhaar benefits. I'm not getting a road. I'm not getting a proper school. I'm not getting a Paka house. So I have day to day problems, livelihood related problems. And you are talking in Greek language. You're talking about Russia, Ukraine. You're talking about the tariffs imposed by President Trump. You're talking about the defense system that we have purchased from Russia, S-400 defense system, and this we have purchased, our government purchased. I'm not able to identify with your campaign slogans because my concerns are different. So local issues will be kept at the back burner, national issues will dominate. That's the problem with one nation, one election. One nation, one election is a bold idea, but it risks centralizing power, weakening federalism, and paradoxically increasing the frequency of elections, as something that we have discussed. It may lead to more elections rather than few. And if national elections and if national issues dominate, then you will see national political parties will prevail and state political parties, regional political parties, they may turn extinct, weakening federalism. These are the ideas proposed by Mr. Villeneuve Vaishnav. And look at the image on your screen. Images, sometimes I will give you a data, and through this data, I will tell you one nation, one election is a good idea. And I will give you the same data and tell you one nation, one election is a bad idea. How? This is a bomber. So it depends upon how you view the statistics. Same statistic can give you different outcomes. This is a bomber. Many bombers were used in wars. Some bombers, some planes, fighter jets returned, and some did not return because they fell down. They were attacked by missiles and they fell down. Then statisticians, what they did, they identified the areas where these fighter jets were attacked through missiles. This is not one fighter jet. This is the image of hundreds of fighter jets which were used in the war. And all these fighter jets, when they returned, this is where they were attacked. Now, if you are told, how do you look at this data? Some people suggested to the government that we should give more protection, iron protection in these areas, because this is where the missiles hit. So if we give more protection to these areas, the fighter jets will not fall, they will return back to our base. Another statistician said this is the incorrect way of reading the data. Even if the missiles hit this area, but the fact is that these fighter jets returned. That means missiles hitting this area does not lead to the collapse or the fall or the crash of that jet. Maybe these areas where hits have not been spotted, where missile hits have not been spotted, we need to strengthen these areas, because it is possible that our fighter jets were hit with missiles in these areas and hence did not return. And this is what we call survivor bias. Sir, why are you discussing this? I am telling you this so that when we present an argument, the same argument can be presented as an advantage and the same argument can be presented as a disadvantage. For example, if we need to implement uniform civil code, I will say for the sake of secularism, implement uniform civil code. Then I will give a counter argument for the sake of secularism, don't implement uniform civil code. It depends on what sort of question is asked and how do you answer that particular. That's the crux of this article. Okay? This is the practice question for your mains. Examine the concept of one nation, one election in the Indian federal structure. What are the constitutional and political challenges involved? Write an answer in 250 words and submit it to us. Another article written by Insia Vahanvati and Ashish Bardwaj in the Hindustan Times, Unfinished Business of Gender Justice in India. Two landmark events. One, Vishaka v. State of Rajasthan. What was this? What was the trigger of this judgment? There was one lady, Pamri Devi. She was working in the Rajasthan government in the Women Development Program. Her job was simple: convince the people in Rajasthan that you should not resort to child marriage. So you can say Pamri Devi was an employee. Who was the employer? State. State of Rajasthan. What was the duty entrusted to this employee by the employer? That you have to convince the people in Rajasthan that you should not resort to child marriage because it affects the dignity of a child. And what Bhavri Devi did, she did to the best of her ability, capability, she tried to stop the marriage of a 1 year old child. Why? Because in Rajasthan, there used to be this practice that there are some dates, some years auspicious for marriage, and this auspicious time may come after a decade. And we don't want to wait till that time, and child marriages would be rampant. But Bhavri Devi belonged to what we call, unfortunately, lower caste. And she tried to stop the so called upper caste Gujar landlords in Rajasthan, from practicing child marriage. And then Bhavri Devi was gang raped. And the allegation was that these five Gujar landlords had gang raped Bhavri Devi. Matter went to the court. The court acquitted all these five people on various grounds. Grounds were, court said, we are not able, you have not been able to convince us. whether upper caste men can rape a lower caste woman. Understand the logic. The court said if Bamri Devi was being raped and the allegation is against five men, one of the men is the uncle, the other is the nephew. And we can't understand or anticipate that in Indian culture, an uncle can rape somebody in presence of the nephew, and the nephew can rape somebody in presence of the uncle, which means the rape did not take place. The husband of Bamri Devi says, I am a witness to this rape. The court says, if you were a witness, what were you doing? Why did you not stop these men? You are a hatta katta individual. You could have flexed your muscles and you should have stopped these five men from raping, which means the rape did not take place. So I am disregarding your testimony in this case. One non governmental organization, Vishaka, approached the Supreme Court and said, dear Supreme Court, there is no law in India which protects the sexual harassment of women at workplace. We need a law which can impose a duty on the employer towards his employee. Supreme Court said, don't worry, we are issuing guidelines in the form of Vishaka guidelines, and this will be used to prevent sexual harassment of women in workplace. Now there can be a question in your mind. Sir, isn't this judicial legislation? Separation of powers is part of the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. Judiciary cannot make laws. Law making is the job of the parliament, job of the legislature. And this term, this phrase, judicial legislation, is like an oxymoron. Judiciary cannot legislate. Legislature cannot act as a judicial body. How did the Supreme Court issue these guidelines, which have the same impact as that of the law, same effect as that of the law? For that, you have to understand two things. Or for that matter, three things. Article 141 says any order, any verdict, any ruling given by the court, by the Supreme Court, will be the law of the land. So when we have issued these guidelines to protect and prevent women from sexual harassment at workplace, this is the law of the land. Number one. Number two, Supreme Court can give any order so as to give complete justice. Article 142. Not just this. Now listen to me carefully. There is a United Nations convention called CEDAW. I think 1979, but please check it if it is correct. I think it's 1979, but please check it. I'm not sure. Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Listen to me carefully. Very important point. Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. India has ratified this convention. India has ratified this convention, but we don't have any law to protect and prevent sexual harassment of women at workplace. Supreme Court, in absence of a law, in absence of a law, can Supreme Court read into this convention which India has ratified and can make a rule, can make a guideline? Yes. If India is a signatory, has ratified a United Nations convention, the power is with the Supreme Court. That what Supreme Court can say, Supreme Court can read that convention into a law and give the verdict. So even if there is no law which protects and prevents sexual harassment of women at workplace, but since India is a signatory to this convention, Supreme Court has the power to read this into the guideline. And that's how we have implemented these guidelines. And it was only in 2013 that finally we have a law known as POSH. The Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act of 2013, popularly known as the POSH Act. So, one important gender justice wave that took place in India, that was because of Bamvari Devi. That was because of this Vishaka guidelines issued by the Supreme Court through Supreme Court. Then came December 16, 2012. Nirbhaya was gang raped in a moving bus. She went to watch a movie along with her male friend. I think the movie was Life of Pi. She was returning from that movie, boarded a bus. The bus had tinted glasses. And this bus roamed around the entire city almost, and no policeman detected it or stopped it. And Nirbhaya was being gang raped inside that moving bus. But this was such a horrific gang rape that it can well be said that it was rarest of the rare. An iron rod was inserted into her private parts, which even ruptured her intestines. And then they were thrown out from the bus, and then the moving bus was made to touch upon these two gentlemen, woman as well as the male part. And then finally she succumbed to the injuries, wounds at a hospital in Singapore. And then there were huge protests in different parts of the country, particularly in Delhi. And that time, Justice Altamas Kabir was the Chief Justice of India. He said even my nephew was participating in these protests. These protests forced the government to set up a committee headed by Justice J.S. Verma, Justice Verma Committee. And Justice Verma Committee was asked, can you please recommend some changes to our criminal laws so that we can make our laws more beneficiary for our women? That's how stalking became an offense. That is how death sentence was declared as the punishment for those who commit rape. So it is because of Bamri Devi and the Supreme Court's Vishaka guidelines, which led to some change in our laws related to gender. And then the protests which took place in the aftermath of the Delhi gang rape and murder, which led to the amendment in the criminal law. But these two individuals write in Hindustan Times that it is still unfinished business of gender justice in India. Courts have done their job. Now is the job of the people. And what is that job of the people? The courts still drag. Yes, there are laws that exist, but women still fare walking alone on the street. The courts still drag and perpetrators still walk free. Why must women bleed before the law takes notice? Why is it that always when there is an incident of rape, that's when the lawmakers come out of their slumber? For example, when RG Car episode took place where that student was gang raped, only then the Aparajita bill was passed by the West Bengal Legislative Assembly, which prescribes mandatory death sentence on the rapist. But why should a woman first bleed and then the law will take the notice? This is the unfinished business of gender justice. Bhavri Devi's last surviving rapist still walks free. The rapist, one of the five men who raped Bhavri Devi, is still alive. Yet her legacy planted a stake in the ground. The path is unfinished, but the path is lit. These quotes, these phrases, these judgments, if you write in your essays, that can lend weight to your essay. So these lectures or these newspaper articles are not only relevant for GS, but relevant for your essay writing as well. These quotes, these statements will have to quote in your answers. That brings us to the closure of another topic. Now let's look at another topic. Justice delayed yet again. Malegaon blasts took place in 2008, in which Sadhvi Pragya Singh Thakur was an accused. This lady later on contested elections from the Bhopal Lok Sabha constituency in Madhya Pradesh, defeated the former Madhya Pradesh Chief Minister Digvijay Singh. And then she gave that famous or infamous speech wherein she said, Nathuram Godse is my hero. Mahatma Gandhi is not. One more individual, I forgot his name. Uh, he was part of Abhinav Bharat. Previously, he was supposed to be part of Indian Army as well. Uh, Lieutenant Colonel Shrikant Purohit, I think was his name. They were accused of these Malegaon blasts, but long story short, they were acquitted by the NIA court because NIA took over this case and NIA court acquitted them. Similarly, in 2006, there was series of blasts which rocked different trains in Mumbai. Local trains were attacked and hundreds of people lost their lives. I think 189 people lost their lives and hundreds were injured. But you don't have to understand these details for your exam. Just keep one thing in mind. Sometimes there is an event and you have to just summarize it briefly so that if you incorporate that in your answer will be much better. Those who were accused of Malegaon blasts, they are set free, acquitted because of lack of evidence. Those who were accused of 26 of July 11, 2006 Mumbai blasts, they are also acquitted because of lack of evidence. Together, what these two acquittals tell us, that's what you have to keep in. Just 2 to 3 paragraphs and you're done. The judgments on two terror cases in India have left the victims. These victims nearly waited 2 decades for justice. Now they are without any sense of justice. They don't know who committed these terror activities. Shouldn't there be responsibility on the investigative agencies as well? Why NIA could fail to investigate these acts of terror without any flaw? Shouldn't we fix accountability on these investigative agencies? Who are these investigative agencies answerable to? For their contradictory claims and shoddy procedures and investigation. Which have allowed these extremist organizations to get away with such terrible crimes in Maharashtra. We don't know who committed these crimes or maybe what was their motive. Yes, the motive seems to be terrorizing the minds of the people, but who were these individuals? Who were these organizations? The people need to know. And this is where we need to fix accountability on investigative agencies for their shoddy investigation. That is the crux of these two verdicts. Because these two verdicts given, those who were accused of these crimes are now acquitted. What about me as a victim of these terror cases, these terror attacks? I am now without any sense of justice. I don't know who killed my loved ones. And that is the travesty because after 2 decades, I don't even know who killed those people, those innocents. Maybe just one line in your answers. Investigative agencies should be held accountable for their shoddy investigation as reflected in the acquittal in the Malegaon blast case of 2006 and the Mumbai local trains blast of 2006. That's it. Without going too deep into the details, what went, who said what, just understand the crux for your examination and you're done. Now, something else, another topic, judicial overreach. Shri Rahul Gandhi, now the leader of the opposition, at that time he was doing and pursuing Bharat Jodo Yatra, troubling the length and breadth of this country. And therein he made a speech and said that 2000 square kilometer of Indian territory we have lost to China. And our army men have been killed by the Chinese People Liberation Army in the fist fight which happened in Galwan, in the Galwan Valley clashes between Indian Army and the PL. One director of the Border Roads Organization approached the court and said, you have defamed the entire army. And defamation case was filed against Rahul. Allahabad High Court dismissed the petition of Rahul Gandhi because he wanted to quash this FIR. Now he approached the Supreme Court. Justice Dipankar Datta is the judge, and Justice Dipankar Datta says protection. no action should be taken against Rahul Gandhi. But then he criticized Rahul Gandhi. Is this how a proud Indian should speak? The Supreme Court is censuring Rahul Gandhi, saying if you were a proud Indian, you would not have asked these questions. How do you know whether 2,000 square kilometer of land, of Indian land, we have lost to China? When there is a clash going on, does it not mean that there will be casualties on both sides, on our side as well as on the enemy side? Why are you speaking in this language? This is where the Hindu editorial says judiciary has committed judicial overreach. When Rahul Gandhi says 2,000 square kilometers of land has been lost to China in Ladakh, Rahul Gandhi is not coming up with an argument in thin air. This has been corroborated by various newspaper articles and investigation stories. That's where Rahul Gandhi is quoting. And isn't this the job of an opposition leader to hold government accountable? Abhishek Manu Singhvi is the lawyer of Rahul Gandhi. He tells the Supreme Court, we are not saying that in times when there is a clash between two armies, there won't be casualties on our side, but we are focusing on accountability. We are focusing on disclosure. People need to know what happened at the Galwan Valley clashes. And this is all part of the political discourse. If this is not allowed, then how can the opposition educate the masses? That's exactly what freedom of speech and expression is. And that is what former Chief Justice of India, Mr. Patanjali Sastry, he said free speech is at the foundation of every democratic organization. Because without free speech, there can be no political education. And without political education, no proper functioning of government institutions is possible. That is why freedom of speech lies at the heart of every democratic organization. And that's the job of the opposition. That's the job of the political class to raise these issues. You don't have to go too deep into details. Just keep one thing in mind that while hearing defamation case against Rahul Gandhi, the Supreme Court, it is alleged, has committed judicial overreach because the Supreme Court censured the leader of the opposition, saying a true Indian should have never asked this question. It is as if the Supreme Court is running certification courses on patriotism and nationalism and issuing certificates to those who are true patriots and those who are not. That's not the job of the that's not the job of the Supreme. And that is the end of this topic. Okay? Okay. Now, rulings and rules on stray dogs. In journalism, we are told about news. News in the sense, what constitutes news so that the journalists can display it. It is told that when a dog bites a man, it is not a news. But if a man bites a dog, it is news. But it seems that this first lesson on journalism turns upside down because of what is happening in India, where frequent dog bites on vulnerable sections of the society, kids, children, is causing news and nuisance. Stray dogs are menace, or some say it is a menace. But there are millions who say no, dogs are not menace. Although these dogs, these are the descendants of wolves, and as such, these are territorial animals. They guard their territory. But it is also true that these dogs, these are the best friends of humans. Contrasting position on dogs. On one side, descendant of wolves. On the other hand, the best friends of humans. But these stray dogs, they are causing havoc in different parts of the country. Delhi, Kerala, Bengaluru, Chennai, in different parts of the country. And this is what is leading to the incidence of rabies as well. And it is argued that India is the rabies capital of the world, particularly New Delhi. Long story short, the Supreme Court issued an order. Supreme Court said all these stray dogs, quote unquote, should be arrested. And then they should be kept in shelter homes. And then they should be vaccinated as well, so that if they are vaccinated, then the incidence of rabies will come down. And don't send them back to the place from where you arrested them, to the place from where you collected them. This was the judgment of the court. And if there is one word to describe this judgment, it is unimplementable. And that has been the consistent problem of the Supreme Court. Consistent criticism of the Supreme Court that sometimes you pass orders, verdicts, and judgments which are unimplementable. For example, once the Supreme Court ordered the complex interlinking of rivers, which even the experts are scratching their head. How do we do it? And now the Supreme Court issued an order saying all these stray dogs in Delhi should be captured, vaccinated, kept in shelter homes, and don't release them back to the place from where you collected them. It is unimplemented. Why? Because lacks of stray dogs, and we don't have enough shelter homes to station them, to house them. And finally, what happened? Another bench of the Supreme Court modified this order and said this order was harsh. Now, you will have to collect these dogs, arrest them, send them to shelter homes, vaccinate them, and then release them back to the areas where you collected. One of the judges of the Supreme Court, he said, I don't understand. The animal rules say that whenever you arrest a dog or you take care of a dog, you send him to a shelter home, you vaccinate, then you have to release this dog to the same place from where you captured this dog. I don't understand this rule. Perhaps we need judges to be taught that these dogs are the descendant of wolves and as such are territorial animals. That means they guard their territory. That means they will have to be thrown back, released back into the area from where we captured them, because they are closely associated with the territory. That is why you will see that in a particular locality, you will always find same dogs, and in a different territory, a different set of dogs, but same. And you won't see them mixing with each other. Why? Because they're guarding their territory. Because that's how they are, that's how they're wired. So, whenever a question on judicial overreach is asked or criticism of the judiciary is done, this is where you need to keep this in mind, because Supreme Court had to correct its previous order, which it termed as unduly harsh, because Supreme Court directed an unimplementable order which said that all these stray dogs should be captured and kept in the shelter homes, but there weren't enough shelter homes to station and house all the stray dogs in the capital of India. Unimplementable order. This topic is, but it does raise some other issues, other concerns. For example, animal rights. And it becomes an important topic for ethics. And this is exactly what Astha ma'am would be discussing on Monday. at 7 o'clock when she would be starting with ethics for the civil services exam. Clear? Okay. Then let's look at another article, another editorial written in the Hindu newspaper, Fix the Flaws. Rahul Gandhi addressed what he called a historic press conference, wherein he said, I have given the proof that there is one parliamentary constituency in Karnataka, in Bengaluru. In that parliamentary constituency, there is one assembly segment called Mahadevpura segment, where there is voter fraud. He gave the data and he said, I am taking this data from the official data of the Election Commission of India. And from that official data, I have realized that there are close to 12,000 cases of duplicate voters, 40,000 cases of fake addresses, 10,452 cases of bulk voters at a single address. It is as if one house is housing 10,000 voters. 4,132 cases of indistinguishable voter ID photos. There are some voter ID cards for which there is no photo, and there are some which are indistinguishable. And 33,692 cases of misusing Form 6. Form 6 is meant for first time voters. And there are 2-time, 3-time, 4-time voters also filling this form. And this Rahul Gandhi alleged is voter fraud, a massive voter fraud. And this violates free and fair elections, which is part of the basic structure. Election Commission of India responded. Election Commission of India said, Rahul Gandhi, if you have this proof, submit it to us under oath. We will see to it. Rahul Gandhi replies and says, I have taken oath in the parliament as the member of the parliament. So I've already taken oath. Now you take action. Legal experts say Election Commission is wrong in asking for this information or this proof or these claims to be submitted under oath. Why? Listen to me carefully. Electoral rolls are to be revised. When do we revise electoral rolls? The law says before every general election or before a by-election or at any time by the Election Commission of India, for example, something which is happening in Bihar, special intensive revision. So when special intensive revision is being carried out in Bihar, and then there are lakhs of voters who are deleted from the voter list, and if you want, you can claim that these voters have been wrongfully removed from the voter list, from the electoral rolls. Submit proof, and we will take them back. Or if you think that we have wrongly included people in the voter list, submit your claims under oath and we will take care of it. Legal experts say in Mahadevpura constituency, when this investigation was done by the Congress party, in Mahadevpura, there was no intensive revision of electoral rolls happening. It is only at that point in time that you can file your complaints, your claims under oath. Or if you are dissatisfied with the election result, you can file an election petition before the High Court. But that election petition can be filed only within 45 days of the declaration of results. Election took place in 2024. We are in 2025. The 40-day period is over. So under no circumstance could Rahul Gandhi be forced to present this evidence or claim under oath. Election Commission is wrong. It's barking at the wrong tree. Instead of asking for oath, it should respond. What led to these concerns? Transparency is important because Election Commission of India works on the trust people have on this constitutional body. If this trust is eroded, the foundation of our democracy gets shaken. People's trust in democratic devices gets lost. And that is reflected in the CSDS study conducted recently, wherein people say, more than 30% people say those respondents, they say we don't have any trust in the Election Commission of India. More problematic is, for example, there are some students who are dissatisfied with my class, but there are some students who are absolutely satisfied with my class. Now, if you are dissatisfied with my classes, you tell me, give us the details of those who are satisfied with your classes so that we can verify your claim, whether large number of students are satisfied with your classes or not. What if I give you all the 40,000 students that I have? I give you the scanned payment receipt of these 40,000 students and tell you that these are the students who are satisfied with my class. Would you be able to make any sense of this data? No. Why? Because then you have to go one by one, sift through all these receipts, P receipts, and then you will decide whether people are satisfied or not satisfied. But instead, if I give you Excel sheet containing the name and the phone number of the student who is satisfied, you can quickly get in touch with these students and ask them whether you are satisfied or not. The problem with Election Commission of India is whenever electoral rolls are updated, electoral rolls are shared with political parties, at least with the recognized political party. But these are shared in the form of bulky image PDFs, just like those payment receipts. And I will not be in a position to scan them effectively. That's the problem. Instead, it should have been given in searchable text format so that I can search. Search in the sense, how many Ashok Kumars are there in the voter list? And if I see that there are 20,000 Ashok Kumar, and these 20,000 Ashok Kumars have the same address, same gender as well, but the photograph is different, which means I can point it out to Election Commission. Hey, there is a fraud. Please correct it. But instead, if I'm asked to scan one image, one PDF image, one after the other, I don't have time and resources to sift through. Instead, what we need to do, the best solution would have been SIR. Best solution would have been SIR. Because law says whenever there are large scale errors in electoral rolls, to correct these large scale errors, we need special intensive review. But the way in which it is carried out in Bihar is also problematic. So this special intensive revision would have redeemed the image of Election Commission of India, but instead it has diminished the image of the Election Commission of India because of the way it is carried out. Why? You are an employee at an organization, let's say Infosys, or you are an employee at Accenture, for example, and you have to enter the campus of Infosys or the campus of Accenture. What is the identity that you have? Maybe the identity is your employee card, which you keep hanging so that once you enter the campus, the gatekeeper will not stop you because that's your identifier. This is the identity card which Infosys has given you, Accenture has given you. We will not deny you entry because we know you are part of this entity. Election Commission of India says we are not going to accept Aadhaar. Although now Supreme Court has forced Election Commission to accept Aadhaar as well. But previously it did not accept. It's okay. Aadhaar is issued by Unique Identification Authority of India, which is not Election Commission of India, which is not a constitutional body. You may dispute it, okay. But Election Commission of India says we will not accept the Election Commission's photo identity card. It is like Infosys saying, no, give us another identity proof that you are our employee. This identity card which we have given you is not a valid proof of identity, which means the previous elections which were conducted by the Election Commission of India using that elector's photo identity card, those elections were false, unfair, unreasonable, fake, or compromised. That is the problem with the special intensive revision which is being carried out in Bihar. But in theory, this should help maintain more accurate rolls. However, the way Election Commission has rushed to implement SIR in Bihar, it has raised more eyebrows. It has diminished the significance, the image of Election Commission. And on top of that, if you look at Bihar, more women voters have been deleted from electoral rolls. Ideally, it should have been more men should have been deleted. Why more men? Because Bihar is a state where we see most out migrants. Who migrate out for Bihar? Most predominantly men. But if the special intensive revision in Bihar shows that more women have been removed from the electoral list, the higher deletion of women electorates could indicate that these women are from marginalized sections, particularly those who are illiterate. Because in Bihar, in the age group of 15 to 49, the literacy rate was 55% in 2019 2021, which means these women, illiterate voters, because they don't have documents to prove that they are the voters, they were erroneously excluded from the electoral list. And for that, the Hindu editorial is suggesting something. What is reform? Election Commission of India say the Hindu editorial says that today VVPATs are being tallied. Every EVM is attached to an VVPAT machine, but all these VVPATs are not counted. How many VVPATs are counted? 5 VVPATs per assembly constituency in a parliamentary constituency, which the Hindu editorial says is not a good sample. It's not a representative sample. We need to increase the number of VVPATs which should be counted apart from EVMs. How do you load symbols into EVMs? That is also problematic according to the Hindu editorial, which means these symbol loading units have problems, according to Hindu. But if you are preparing for the civil services examination, you can criticize, but the criticism should be valid. I think this criticism by the Hindu newspaper is invalid. Why? Because Supreme Court said that if there is a candidate who comes at serial number 2 or serial number 3, that means if the election is over, the winner has won, and the candidate who is a runner up and the second runner up, if you're not satisfied with the election results, do you know what you can do? You can get in touch with the election commission and you can verify 5% of the VVPATs. 5% is a good statistical number. It's a good sample. So already we have a verdict of the court. And the Supreme Court has said that these symbol loading units, which is used to load symbols on the VVPAT machine, it should be stored for 45 days after the declaration of results. So that if there is any discrepancy, if there is any challenge, you can challenge it in the court of law. Yes, one problem is, what about CCTV footage? The Election Commission of India has said we are not going to share CCTV footage with the candidates or the political. Why? Because it affects the privacy of the voter. Chief Election Commissioner says, not me, he says in a press conference, should we share the voter footage where our women and daughters are voting? But the same Election Commission of India shared the footage when Kangna Ranaut and Sonia Gandhi and Mahua Moitra and Priyanka Chaturvedi were voting for the vice president's election a couple of days ago. Those are also women and daughters, our women and daughters. So this speaks of patriarchy and hypocrisy. CCTV footage needs to be shared so that we can identify whether there are bogus voters or repeat voters or duplicate voters. So it all hinges upon the credibility of the election commission. And steps should be taken to enhance the credibility of the Election Commission of India, because right now the image of Election Commission of India is at its lowest. These were the 14 topics that we had to discuss. I hope I was in a position to comprehensively cover these 14 topics, both for prelims as well as the mains examination from August 2025. and we will meet every month and discuss current affairs of a month. For example, we will meet in October and we will discuss the current affairs of September 2025. Now, if you have any questions, please let me know. If you have got benefited from this session, please press the like button, subscribe to our channel, and after the session ends, please drop in your feedback in the comment section. Till then, if you have any questions, please let me know. No questions. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, then that is it for today. I'll see you again next time. Till then, have a great time. All the best. Good night.